By sunrise, one officer in that hospital parking lot would lose everything he thought a badge could protect. The words could have belonged to the cold wind sweeping across the concrete, or to the pale security camera bolted above the emergency entrance, or maybe to the stillness that always settles outside a hospital after midnight, when grief moves quietly and even anger sounds out of place. Officer Brett Lawson did not hear any warning at all. He only heard his own authority. He only saw a black woman in a dark coat stepping out of a silver sedan near the staff lane, her face tired, her shoulders tight, one hand still wrapped around her phone like she had been holding it too hard for too long. Upstairs, in the intensive care unit, Lieutenant Naomi Carter's mother was sleeping under a web of clear tubes and blinking monitors after a complicated procedure that had stretched deep into the night. Naomi had just walked out for air, carrying the sterile smell of the hospital with her, carrying the quiet fear that comes when the person who once made you feel safe is suddenly small in a bed with rails on both sides. She did not look like a ranking officer in that moment. She looked like a daughter trying not to fall apart in public. That was all Brett Lawson saw, and even that he read wrong. "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle," he called, his voice sharp enough to cut across the lot and turn heads near the sliding glass doors. Naomi paused with one hand on the car door, the white hospital light flattening the exhaustion in her face into something almost unreadable. A nurse pushing through the entrance slowed. A security guard near the front desk window lifted his eyes. Somewhere in the distance, an ambulance siren faded into the city like a thread being pulled loose. Naomi turned carefully, not startled, not defensive, just tired. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked. Brett took 3 quick steps toward her, the beam of his flashlight glancing off the wet pavement, the chrome trim of her car, the ring on her left hand. "I asked you to step away from the vehicle," he said again, louder this time, because some men mistake volume for control. Naomi did what disciplined people do when they sense a moment turning dangerous in a way that has nothing to do with physical danger and everything to do with pride, ego, and an audience. She stepped back once. No sudden movement, no attitude, no scene. But Brett had already chosen his version of her. A woman out of place. A woman to correct. A woman he could command before the witnesses around them decided whether he looked strong or foolish. "What are you doing in this section?" he asked. The question might have sounded routine to anyone walking by. It was his tone that changed it. There was no courtesy in it. No professional distance. Only suspicion sharpened by contempt. Naomi looked toward the hospital entrance for half a second, toward the floor where her mother lay under fluorescent light, then back at him. "I'm here with family," she said. Her voice was low, steady, almost gentle, which somehow seemed to irritate him more. Brett glanced at the car, then at her face, then at the hospital wristband still fastened around her arm from visitor check-in. He could have ended it there. He could have nodded, moved on, let the night stay ordinary. Instead, he squared his shoulders as if the parking lot had become a stage and said, "I'm going to need ID, and I'm going to need you to stop acting difficult." Around them, the silence deepened. Naomi did not move right away. Not because she was afraid. Not because she was angry. Because in that one ugly second, she understood exactly what kind of night this was about to become. Naomi held his stare for one quiet beat, then reached slowly into her coat pocket and handed over her driver license with 2 fingers, the same controlled way a person handles something fragile in a room full of careless hands. Brett took it without thanks. His flashlight beam dragged across the card, then back to her face, then to the visitor band on her wrist, as if he were searching for permission to doubt what was already plain. The cold air carried the scent of rain, engine heat, and disinfectant from the emergency doors sliding open and shut behind them. A man in blue scrubs stepped outside with a paper cup of coffee and stopped halfway to the curb. A woman in a gray sweater tightened her hold on a little girl's hand. Nobody said anything. That was the strange thing about public humiliation. It rarely began with noise. It began with people going still. "Naomi Carter," Brett read, flattening the name with his voice. "You work here." Naomi could feel the ache behind her eyes that came from too much fluorescent light and too little sleep. She had been at her mother's bedside since before sunset, listening to machines do the work that worry could not. She had spoken to surgeons, signed forms, called cousins, answered messages she barely remembered writing back. Her body felt heavy, but her voice did not. "My mother is upstairs," she said. I stepped out for air. Brett tilted his head like he had caught a lie instead of a daughter on one of the worst nights of her year. "That does not explain why you are parked in a restricted section." Naomi glanced at the painted line near her front tire. "Staff lane after 10 p.m., visitor overflow temporarily redirected because of construction near the east wing." She had seen the temporary sign at the entrance and followed it exactly. So had the nurse who waved her through 40 minutes earlier. Brett either had not seen the sign or had decided it did not matter. "The attendant directed me here," she said. "You can verify that inside." The answer was simple. It should have settled things. Instead, Brett stepped closer, not enough to touch, but enough to make the moment feel smaller, tighter, more personal than procedure ever should. "I am verifying it with you," he said. "So let us try this again. Why are you in this section?" Naomi heard the emphasis. It was not on the section. It was on you. The security camera above the entrance gave a faint mechanical click as it adjusted. She looked at it for half a second, then back at him. A person learns, over time, the difference between a misunderstanding and a performance. Misunderstanding relaxes when you answer the question. Performance only grows hungrier. Brett was not gathering facts anymore. He was feeding something in himself. Naomi folded her hands in front of her to keep them still. "Officer, I have answered you." Her tone stayed respectful, but it lost a degree of softness. Not warmth. Clarity. That changed the air at once. Brett's jaw tightened. He handed back her license, but not all the way. He held onto the edge of it for a second. Longer than necessary, as if even the return had to feel like a test she passed by permission. "You seem to think the rules are optional," he said. The little girl by the entrance looked up at her mother. The nurse near the doors shifted her weight. Somewhere overhead, a helicopter pulsed across the night sky, a dull chop of sound that faded as quickly as it came. Naomi took her license back and slipped it into her pocket. "No," she said, calm as winter glass. "I think the rules should be applied correctly." That was when Brett's expression changed. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The look of a man who had expected compliance and gotten intelligence instead. The look of someone who could handle grief, silence, and obedience, but not composure. "Do not get smart with me," he said. The words landed harder than the volume behind them. Naomi felt something settle inside her, not fear, not anger, but certainty. Upstairs, her mother was sleeping under warming blankets and a ceiling full of machines. Down here, under white hospital light and a camera that missed nothing, this officer had stopped pretending the stop was routine. And once a man stopped pretending, he usually showed you exactly who he was. Brett had heard that tone before from lawyers, supervisors, and the occasional citizen who knew enough policy to make trouble, and he hated it every time. But hearing it from Naomi, standing alone in a dark coat under hospital lights with a visitor band still around her wrist, seemed to strike some deeper nerve in him. He shifted his stance and looked past her toward the silver sedan as though the car itself had offended him. "Stay right there," he said, lifting one hand in a gesture that tried to turn the open parking lot into a checkpoint. Naomi did not move. The night air slipped colder between them. Somewhere near the emergency entrance, the sliding doors opened with a soft hydraulic sigh, and a gust of warmth rolled out carrying the smell of coffee, hand sanitizer, and overworked heating vents. It should have been an ordinary scene again by now. An officer asks a question, gets an answer, verifies it, and moves on. But Brett had passed the point where resolution interested him. What he wanted now was submission. Naomi could see it in the way he squared his shoulders and widened his voice, trying to make the space belong to him alone. "You are being uncooperative," he said. The phrase hung there, polished and official on the surface, but rotten underneath. It was the kind of phrase that sounded legitimate to strangers and false to anyone who had ever worn a badge with discipline instead of ego. Naomi let the silence stretch for a second, careful not to feed the performance with anger. "I have answered every question you asked," she said. "If you need confirmation, hospital security can verify my parking assignment in less than a minute." Brett gave a short laugh with no humor in it. "That is not how this works." Naomi looked at him fully then, and the tiredness in her face gave way to something steadier, something older than this parking lot, and stronger than this moment. She knew men like him. Men who borrowed confidence from uniforms they had not yet grown worthy of. Men who mistook calm women for weak ones. Men who heard a measured voice and assumed it belonged to someone they could corner. A nurse had stopped just inside the glass now, pretending to check her phone while watching everything. The security guard at the front desk window was no longer pretending at all. He had risen from his chair, one hand near the radio clipped to his belt, his eyes fixed on the lot. Brett either did not notice or did not care. "Hands where I can see them," he said. Naomi slowly opened both hands at her sides, palms visible, not because he had earned compliance, but because she refused to let his bad judgment become her bad decision. The concrete beneath her shoes still held the damp shine of earlier rain, reflecting the hard white lights overhead in broken streaks. Her breath came steady. Her mind did too. Upstairs, her mother was between pain and sleep, trusting that the world outside that room would remain decent for one more night. Naomi felt that thought settle into her spine like steel. "Officer," she said, and for the first time there was a note in her voice that made the people watching lean in without understanding why. "You need to take one step back and listen carefully." Brett did not step back. His jaw worked once. "You do not give instructions here." Naomi did not blink. She looked at the camera above the entrance, then at the witnesses gathering in the edges of the light, then back at him. When she spoke again, her voice dropped low enough that everyone had to go quiet to catch it. "That is where you are wrong." For the first time, something uncertain flickered across Brett Lawson's face. Not fear, not yet, but the brief irritation of a man who senses control slipping and cannot understand why. The parking lot seemed to narrow around that feeling. White light spilled from the emergency entrance and turned every surface flat and unforgiving. The silver hood of Naomi's car, the damp blacktop, the glass doors behind the nurse who had not moved in nearly a minute. Even the security camera above them looked less like equipment now and more like an eye that had made up its mind. Naomi stood exactly where she was, hands visible, posture calm, her dark coat lifting slightly in the cold breeze that drifted between the parked cars. She looked nothing like the picture Brett had built in his head when he first saw her. Nothing uncertain, nothing disposable, nothing easy. "Then explain it," Brett said, trying to recover ground with volume. "Explain why you think you can stand here and tell me what to do." Naomi let out one slow breath. It came white in the night air and disappeared almost at once. "Because this stopped being a routine question 3 minutes ago," she said. "And because you are no longer acting like this is about parking." The words did not land like an argument. They landed like a record being set straight. That was what unsettled him. Naomi was not pleading. She was documenting. Brett gave a stiff smile that never reached his eyes. "You are making a lot of assumptions." "No," Naomi said. "I am recognizing a pattern." The security guard had stepped just outside the sliding doors now, close enough to intervene if he had to, but still holding back, still waiting for some sign that the situation might return to normal on its own. The nurse remained near the entrance, phone lowered at her side, no longer pretending she was not listening. A second man in scrubs paused by a concrete pillar with his coffee cooling untouched in his hand. Nobody wanted a scene at a hospital after midnight. That was exactly why Brett's behavior looked worse with every passing second. He should have felt it by now. He should have heard the way the silence around him had changed. But pride is loud inside the people who worship it. "Pattern," he repeated. "Be careful with that word." Naomi did not miss the warning folded into his tone. She had heard that kind of caution before too, the kind that only appears when someone wants to intimidate without leaving fingerprints on the sentence. Her eyes stayed on his face. "I am being careful," she said. "More careful than you have been." That did it. Something in Brett hardened. Not because she had insulted him, but because she had refused to shrink. He took one step closer and lifted his radio, thumb near the button, ready to turn his ego into paperwork, witnesses into an audience, and a tired daughter into a problem that needed handling. Naomi saw it before he spoke. She saw the decision form in his shoulders. This was no longer a man trying to sort out a parking question. This was a man preparing to justify himself in real time by escalating the very situation he had created. "Dispatch may need to roll on this," he said, more to the people watching than to her. Naomi looked at the radio, then at his hand, then back into his face with a calm that now felt almost merciless. "Officer Lawson," she said quietly. It was the first time she had used his name. The effect was instant. His expression shifted. Just a fraction. But enough. "You need to stop talking and start thinking." The words settled over the lot, like a pressure drop before a storm. Behind the glass, the nurse straightened. The security guard's hand moved fully to his radio. Brett's thumb hovered over the transmit button. And in that suspended second, with the hospital lights burning cold above them and every witness suddenly alert, Naomi reached slowly toward the inside pocket of her coat. Naomi's hand disappeared into the inner pocket of her coat with the kind of calm that only made the people watching more alert. Brett's thumb hovered over the radio button, his chin lifted, his breath visible in the cold air as if he had already decided this moment belonged to him. The parking lot held still around that assumption. The nurse by the door stopped shifting her weight. The security guard stood square under the bright entrance lights, one hand at his own radio now, eyes moving from Brett's face to Naomi's coat and back again. Even the low hum of idling engines from the drop-off lane seemed to recede. Naomi moved slowly, deliberately, giving no one an excuse to misread what came next. Then she drew out a leather credential wallet and held it in front of her chest. The gold shield caught the hospital light first. After that came the words. Clear. Official. Impossible to explain away. Brett looked down at it, and the change in his face was immediate, not dramatic, not loud, but complete. It was the kind of change that happened when certainty hit a wall it had not imagined could exist. His mouth parted slightly. The line of his shoulders lost shape. For one long second, he did not say anything at all. Lieutenant Naomi Carter watched him absorb it without satisfaction, without triumph, almost without expression. She had given him opportunities to stop. Too many. You should have listened, she said. Her voice was not harsh. That made it worse. Brett stared at the shield again as if a second look might alter the rank, the department seal, the name he had already read once on her license and somehow failed to see. Lieutenant. Not civilian. Not confusion. Not some anonymous woman he could corner under fluorescent light and call difficult because she had not lowered her eyes quickly enough. A lieutenant. A black woman who had stood in front of him the entire time with more discipline than he had shown in a single breath. The nurse near the entrance inhaled softly. The security guard's posture changed at once, not relaxed exactly, but reoriented, his attention shifting away from Naomi and fixing entirely on Brett. The balance of the scene had turned, and everyone felt it before anyone spoke. Brett swallowed and straightened his uniform shirt with one quick tug, the kind of reflex that comes when a man suddenly remembers how he might look from the outside. Lieutenant, he said, but the word landed awkwardly, too late to sound respectful and too thin to carry authority. Naomi closed the credential wallet, but did not put it away. You addressed me as if I had no standing here, she said. You ignored my explanation, dismissed my compliance, and escalated a routine interaction in front of hospital staff and civilians. Her eyes flicked once toward the camera above the entrance. And you did it on record. Brett followed her glance without meaning to. The camera sat above them in its metal housing, small, pale, indifferent. He looked at it as though seeing it for the first time. The security guard, Miguel Alvarez, took 3 measured steps closer, careful and professional. Lieutenant, he said, addressing Naomi directly now. The full exterior feed is recorded and time-stamped. We also have audio near the emergency doors. Brett's face lost another shade of color. That was the detail he had not accounted for. Video was one thing. Audio was something else. Tone lived in audio. Timing lived in audio. The exact shape of his own choices lived there too. Naomi gave Miguel a brief nod. Thank you. Brett tried to recover, but recovery requires ground, and his had already given way beneath him. This was a misunderstanding, he said. And even to his own ears the sentence sounded smaller than the moment around it. Naomi looked at him with a steadiness that left no room for comfort. No, she said. A misunderstanding ends when the facts are clarified. You kept going after that. The nurse by the entrance lowered her eyes for a moment, not out of disinterest, but because the truth of it had become too plain to stare at directly. Inside the glass doors, another staff member had paused at the reception desk, clearly listening now. No one needed Naomi to raise her voice. The facts were doing that for her. Brett opened his mouth again, searching for a better version of the last 5 minutes. One that made him look procedural instead of personal, cautious instead of hostile, professional instead of threatened. But the night would not bend for him anymore. Naomi slipped the credential wallet back into her coat, and the motion felt less like concealment than conclusion. Do not say another word unless you are prepared to explain every one of them, she said quietly. Then, from somewhere behind the glass, a new voice cut into the cold stillness. Calm. Male. Command level. Officer Lawson, it said, step away from her vehicle. Now. Captain Daniel Reeves stepped through the sliding glass doors with the kind of authority that did not need volume to be felt. The bright hospital light framed him for a second, then flattened across his dark overcoat and silver hair as he came down the walkway toward them, steady and unhurried, one hand holding a phone he had clearly just set aside. Brett obeyed the order before he could think of a reason not to. He took one step back from Naomi's vehicle, then another, each one small enough to preserve his pride and obvious enough to expose it. The cold night seemed sharper now. Every sound returned in pieces, the whisper of the automatic doors, the distant churn of tires on wet pavement, the soft crackle of a radio somewhere inside the lobby. Naomi did not move. She only turned slightly toward Captain Reeves, and for the first time since stepping out of the intensive care unit, some of the strain in her posture eased. Not because she needed rescuing, but because the truth had finally entered the scene with rank attached to it. Reeves stopped beside Miguel Alvarez, gave the security guard a brief nod, then looked at Brett with a level gaze that made excuses feel flimsy before they were even spoken. Lieutenant Carter, he said first, because order mattered and respect mattered more. Are you all right? Naomi held his eyes and answered with the same restraint she had carried all night. I am fine, Captain. My mother is upstairs recovering. I came down for air. Officer Lawson turned that into something else. Reeves gave one small nod, not rushed, not theatrical, the nod of a man storing facts exactly where they belonged. Then he turned to Brett. Explain. That single word landed harder than any threat could have. Brett straightened, then seemed to think better of the movement halfway through it. Sir, I was checking a vehicle in a restricted section. She became argumentative, and I was attempting to verify. Reeves raised one hand just enough to stop the sentence without interrupting it loudly. You were attempting to verify what? Brett's eyes flicked once toward Naomi, once toward the camera above the entrance, once toward the nurse still standing inside the doors. Her reason for being here, he said. After she told you her reason? Reeves asked. Brett hesitated. It was only a second, but in moments like this a second could split a career in half. Yes, sir. Reeves let the silence sit there. It was not an angry silence. It was worse. It was administrative. Clinical. The kind of silence that weighed every word against policy, judgment, and consequence. Miguel spoke with careful professionalism. Captain, the exterior feed is continuous, and audio near the entrance is clear. I have the timestamp marked. Brett looked at him sharply, but the look had no power in it now. Naomi could almost feel the shape of the night changing around them, as if the hard white light overhead had shifted from exposure to evidence. Reeves extended his hand toward Brett, palm up, not for a handshake and not for comfort. Your body camera. Brett froze. It was the first true stillness Naomi had seen from him, stripped of swagger and stripped of motion, the stillness of a man reaching the edge of denial and seeing only open air beyond it. Sir. Reeves did not blink. Your body camera. Now. Brett fumbled at his uniform, unclipping it with fingers that no longer looked certain. When he placed it in the captain's hand, the sound of plastic against leather gloves was small, but it carried. The nurse behind the glass lowered her eyes. Miguel exhaled through his nose. Naomi looked up once more at the hospital windows above them, toward the floor where her mother lay asleep, unaware that down here, under cold lights and a silent camera, a man who had trusted his badge more than his character was beginning to understand the difference between the two. Captain Reeves did not look at the body camera in his hand right away. He turned it over once, as if its weight mattered, as if the ordinary shape of it made the night feel even worse. Then he slipped it into his coat pocket and let the silence work on Brett Lawson a little longer. Silence had a way of stripping performance out of a man. Under bright hospital lights, with nurses, security staff, and strangers watching from behind glass, there was nowhere left for him to project confidence that was not already cracking. Naomi stood near the front quarter panel of her sedan, her hands relaxed now, her breathing even, the visitor band still pale against her wrist. The parking lot no longer felt like a confrontation. It felt like an official record waiting to be signed. Lieutenant Carter, Reeves said, his voice level, Walk me through it from the beginning. Naomi did not rush. She gave the facts the way seasoned officers did when they respected both truth and process. She told him when she came downstairs from the intensive care unit. She told him where the parking attendant directed her after the East Wing construction closure. She told him how Brett had opened the exchange, how she answered, how the questions kept changing after the explanation was already clear. She did not dramatize a single detail. She did not need to. Each sentence made Brett look smaller than the one before. Miguel confirmed the temporary visitor reroute without hesitation. The nurse, Emily Ross, stepped just outside the doors and quietly added that Naomi had come from the ICU floor less than 10 minutes earlier and had looked exhausted, not evasive. A second staff member confirmed seeing the same parking instructions posted near the entrance. The facts began to close in around Brett with the patient, orderly pressure of a door sealing shut. He heard it happening. Naomi could see that too. His breathing had changed. His eyes no longer landed anywhere for long. First the captain, then the security guard, then the hospital sign, then the camera above the entrance. Always the camera, as though he kept hoping it might disappear if he stopped looking at it. Officer Lawson, Reeves said, turning to him at last. Did you ask hospital staff to verify her parking authorization before escalating the stop? Brett swallowed. No, sir. Did Lieutenant Carter comply when you requested identification? Yes, sir. Did she raise her voice? Brett hesitated. No, sir. Did she threaten you? No, sir. The answers fell one by one like pieces being locked into place. Naomi watched his face as he heard himself say them. That was the moment denial finally began to loosen. Not because he had become honest in his heart, but because the structure around him no longer allowed dishonesty to stand upright. Reeves waited a beat, then asked the question that mattered most. So why did this continue? Brett opened his mouth and found nothing ready. The old instincts were still there. He wanted to call it tension, miscommunication, officer safety, anything broad enough to hide inside. But every shelter had already been taken away. The witnesses were too calm. Naomi was too precise. The hospital staff had no stake in departmental politics. And somewhere inside that body camera, clipped, audio and time-stamped footage were preserving the exact tone he had used, the exact pauses he had taken, the exact moment the stop ceased to be about policy and became something uglier. I made a judgment call, Brett said finally, but even he seemed to hear how weak it sounded. Reeves held his gaze. No. You made this personal. The words did not echo. They settled. That made them heavier. Emily Ross lowered her eyes toward the pavement. Miguel shifted his stance, not out of discomfort, but out of recognition that the hardest part had begun. Brett was no longer defending an encounter. He was standing inside its consequences. Naomi felt the cold air touch her face again, cleaner somehow, less suffocating than before. She looked up at the dark hospital windows and thought of her mother sleeping under thin blankets and machine light, unaware that this long night had split itself into two separate tests, one of the body upstairs and one of character down here. Reeves drew a slow breath, then reached for his phone. Internal Affairs will review the footage before sunrise, he said. Until then, you are relieved from field contact effective immediately. Brett stared at him as if he had misheard. But no one else moved. No one asked for clarification, because everyone standing there already knew the same thing. This was no longer a warning. This was the first sentence of the end. The words seemed to drain the heat out of the parking lot. Relieved from field contact. Effective immediately. Brett Lawson stood under the hospital lights with the stunned stillness of a man who had spent his whole career believing consequences were for other people. His mouth opened, then closed again. The answer he wanted did not exist. There was no version of the night left that could be rearranged into something harmless. Naomi could see that realization moving across his face in slow pieces, not dramatic, not loud, just final. Captain Reeves did not raise his voice. He did not have to. Turn over your vehicle keys until morning review, he said. You will not engage another civilian tonight. You will not file a narrative until instructed. And you will not contact any witness in this incident. Each instruction landed with the clean, measured force of policy doing exactly what it was built to do when ego had failed. Brett tried to speak anyway. Sir, with respect, this is being taken out of context. Reeves held up one hand, and the sentence died where it stood. Context is exactly what we have, he said. Video, audio, witnesses. a clear timeline, and a lieutenant who gave you every opportunity to correct yourself. Naomi looked down for a moment at the visitor band around her wrist, the thin strip of plastic now feeling strangely heavier than the badge in her coat pocket. Upstairs, her mother was still asleep under hospital monitors, and down here a different kind of monitor had captured the truth with perfect indifference. That was what struck her most. Machines had done their job. People were the fragile variable. Emily Ross shifted near the entrance and wrapped her arms against the cold, but she did not go inside. Miguel remained where he was, steady and watchful, as if he understood that the quiet after misconduct could be as revealing as the misconduct itself. Brett reached slowly toward his belt, then stopped, his fingers curling uselessly for a second before he forced them open again. He was trying to keep his hands busy because he could no longer keep the moment under control. "Lieutenant," he said, turning toward Naomi at last, and the title sounded unfamiliar in his mouth, as if respect had become a language he had not practiced enough to speak smoothly. "If this came across wrong, that was not my intention." Naomi lifted her eyes to him. The hospital light caught the fatigue in them, but not weakness. Not even close. She had heard apologies shaped like escape routes before. This was not remorse. It was fear wearing a softer tone. "Intent is not the only thing under review," she said. "Choices are." He looked away first. That, more than anything, told the truth. Captain Reeves extended his hand again, this time not for the camera, but for the patrol keys clipped at Brett's side. There was a pause before Brett removed them. A tiny pause, but in it lived the whole collapse of the night. The keys came free with a metallic jingle that sounded too small for what it meant. Reeves took them and slipped them into his coat pocket beside the body camera. Badge in one place, evidence in another. Privilege and accountability no longer traveling together. Through the glass doors, 2 more staff members had gathered near the reception desk, speaking in hushed tones. The little girl from earlier was gone now, taken home by the woman in the gray sweater, but Naomi wondered what she had seen before leaving. A man in uniform using suspicion like a weapon. A woman standing still and refusing to surrender her dignity to it. Maybe that was enough. Maybe sometimes that was the only lesson a night could offer. Brett stood with empty hands at his sides, and for the first time he looked exactly what he was in that moment. Not powerful, not commanding, just a man discovering that a badge could amplify character, but never replace it. Reeves glanced toward Naomi, and his voice softened by a degree. "Lieutenant Carter, I can have someone escort you back upstairs." Naomi shook her head. "That will not be necessary." She turned slightly toward the hospital entrance, then stopped. The cold brushed against her face. The camera above the doors gave another faint click as it adjusted its angle. Somewhere inside the building, an elevator chimed. Behind her, Brett said nothing at all. He had finally run out of words. And in the silence that followed, with his keys gone, his authority stripped back to procedure, and the witnesses still standing under the white light, everyone there could feel it. The review had not even started yet, but his career was already beginning to separate from him. Naomi stood there for one last second, not to savor what had happened, not to measure what had been lost behind her, but to make sure the part of herself that had stayed calm all night did not harden into something colder on the walk back upstairs. The hospital doors reflected her shape in pale glass, dark coat, tired face. Visitor band still circling her wrist like a quiet reminder of why she had come down in the first place. Her mother was still on the other side of those doors, still sleeping under dim monitors and thin blankets, still trusting a world that too often asked black women to carry grace through moments that should have required nothing from them at all. Naomi let out a slow breath and finally turned toward the entrance. Her shoes moved softly over the damp concrete, each step clean, measured, leaving no sign of triumph behind. That was the thing Brett Lawson would remember. Longest. Not a speech. Not humiliation. Not anger. The absence of revenge. He remained where he was under the white hospital lights, empty-handed now, shoulders no longer squared by habit or ego, his reflection broken in the dark window of the patrol car he could no longer touch. Captain Reeves stood a few feet away, phone in hand, already moving the night into its next official form, names, timestamps, review channels, all the cold machinery that begins turning when conduct fails and evidence does not. Miguel stayed near the doors until Naomi passed him, then gave her a small nod, the kind offered not out of pity, but respect. Emily Ross held the door open from inside, her eyes gentle, her posture careful, as if she understood that some people walk through a hospital carrying more than fear for the person upstairs. Naomi returned the nods with quiet gratitude and stepped beneath the bright lobby lights. Warm air met her face. The smell of coffee, floor polish, and antiseptic replaced the sting of cold pavement. Behind her, the door sighed shut with soft finality. The sound drew a line through the night. On one side of it stood procedure, consequence, and a man learning too late that bias can wear the language of protocol until the truth shines on it. On the other side stood a daughter going back to her mother. Naomi did not look back immediately. She walked past the reception desk, past the muted television mounted in a corner, past 2 rows of plastic chairs where families slept in impossible positions with jackets folded under their heads. At the elevator bank, she finally paused and turned just enough to see the parking lot through the glass. Brett was still there, smaller now, almost flattened by distance and light, while Captain Reeves spoke into his phone without hurry. No one crowded him. No one comforted him. The night had stopped revolving around his voice. Naomi held that image for only a moment, then let it go. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. Inside, the brushed steel walls reflected a woman who looked worn down but not broken, quiet but not defeated. As the doors began to close, the last thing she saw was the security camera above the entrance making one small mechanical adjustment, turning by a fraction, continuing its watch without judgment and without rest. Then the doors sealed, the lobby disappeared, and the elevator carried her upward toward her mother, while below, in the cold light of the parking lot, the silence around Brett Lawson settled into the shape of an ending.